Thank you so much, Hester, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the initial presentation today going over the results of the Future of Learning Technologies research report. Actually, Karen and I were involved with pulling that report together, and I think we're always very concerned about what the future is bringing us. But before I get into any detail or tell you who we are, let's talk about why we're here right now. As the virtual classroom emerged in the 1990s, and it was that early, we as organizations, we all said, one day this is going to be really important. But the time was never right? We always wanted to be face-to-face. That was the gold standard for learning, and virtual classroom tools were kind of underutilized, and everything became a webinar like today. Real training wasn't happening. But one day we were going to do it. And with the pandemic, everybody went online all at once. So that one day is here now. And one of the lasting impacts of the pandemic on learning and development and on HR and on the workforce in general was a shift toward what we call a virtual first approach. Because of the logistics, we can reach everybody when we needed to, and certainly the costs involved or the reduced costs involved. Organizations are starting to say, tell me why it can't be virtual. Tell me why we can't reap those benefits. And it's not just about virtual training anymore. It's about hybrid training. This workforce of today is everywhere all the time, and they're moving. So we don't even know where they are day to day. So the future has arrived. It's here. And what we'll talk about today is your organization prepared to create sustainable and engaging hybrid virtual learning. That's what we're discussing today. So who we are. My name is Jennifer Hoffman, and I founded Insync back in 2000. We've always just done virtual. And back in 2000, we have a lot of the same concerns that I think you're dealing with now. How do people learn and engage without the benefit of true eye contact and body language? How do you make sure they're not distracted or their bosses aren't tapping them on the shoulder and pulling them away? There's a lot of distractions involved. And most of all, how do you convince your stakeholders, and that's your learners and your facilitators and your clients, that virtual learning is real learning? But virtual learning is real learning, and that's always been a core of our philosophy. My partner in crime today is Karen Veith. Karen?
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. My name is Karen Veith. I'm the Vice President of Virtual Learning Solutions here at Insync. That's a mouthful. But really what that means is, the ability to go in and work with organizations to find and fine-tune, if you will, the virtual learning strategy, the solution for your virtual learning strategy. And I actually came into virtual learning about the same time Jennifer did, roughly 23 years ago. Our paths crossed about 16 years ago, and I've been working hand in hand with Jennifer ever since. But when I started working in the virtual classroom 23 years ago, kind of thought it was a fad. And I thought I'd jump on this train for a while and I'd go back to face-to-face training, kind of like what the pandemic did 3 years ago to all of you, right? Everybody was forced, so to speak, to go in and jump on the train. And then there was this feeling of, maybe I could jump off this train and go back to what I know to be true training. However, if I go back to my experience 23 years ago, once I found the power, the nuances of virtual training, I became a full believer in the potential that it had. And what we're hopeful to do today is to help you see the full potential of what the virtual classroom can do, that we know it can come in and it can represent. But really what I found over the course of the 23 years that kept me in this chair, not tied to this chair, but just in this chair, was the ability to go beyond this computer screen, to go beyond the brick and mortar building and really bring those two worlds together. So Jennifer's going to kind of walk us through where we've been over the last 20 some years at Insync training, and then we'll get into the meat of the content.
Yep. But really, for more than 2 decades, we've been working in only virtual learning solutions. And like I said earlier, our goal is to provide sustainable and active virtual learning in this complicated hybrid environment. Um, so we've got lots of stuff. We are a sponsor of today's program, so you'll get more information about us. But what we're here to do is to help make your virtual classroom successful. And for that, your organization needs to be ready. So that's what we're talking about right now. So today's discussion is going to be about the attributes of what hybrid virtual learning is about. We'll talk about its relationship to blended learning and how different learning environments impact learner engagement on 3 different dimensions. We'll talk about environmental, intellectual, and emotional engagement. And that's one of the questions that came in from one of you, or several of you. How do we keep people engaged? Then we'll talk about some considerations when we're implementing a hybrid virtual learning strategy. They present a lot of challenges, but so how do we make that happen? Karen, after I talk about what these considerations or challenges are, Karen's going to talk about one of her real clients. It's a global technology company. We're calling them Bluebird Technology because we can't use their name, how they overcame these challenges and implemented hybrid virtual learning. And we'll leave stepping away from organizations and worried about the learners. So is the organization ready? And how do we make sure our learners are enabled? You can send all the questions in chat and in Q&A. We'll try to answer them all, but we'll also collect them. And we're going to post a blog and make sure everybody gets access to that blog with the answers to your questions as well. Right, Karen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get started. If everybody would please go to chat and tell me in your organization right now, what does hybrid learning look like? What does hybrid virtual learning look like? Define it for you. Define it for your organization. Online learning, mix of virtual and in-room trainings, an LMS along with in-person real-time practice, the Talent LMS platform, a combination of online and classes. I'm seeing stuff, something just came in privately about blended learning, virtual learning. 90% of our seminars are virtual only, LMS platform as well. So they're not necessarily blended, but maybe they are hybrid. So Karen, we're hearing, we're seeing a lot of things that we expect. Learning experience platforms. You hear phrases like hybrid and learning experience platforms and virtual learning and blended learning. What's your take on what you're seeing in the chat?
It's what we're hearing, right? It's the mix, it's the combination. It's most of our seminars are 90% virtual. It's the tools. I love the words mixture, right? And what I really think is interesting is when we start looking at the face-to-face environment, the mixture of in-person, on live and online, asynchronous, e-learning, as Heather Wood points out in the chat, it's important for us to think about the definition of hybrid being a truly unique environment, right? We need to look at how we bring people together in a way that makes it not just a mix or a combination, but truly its own entity. And so that's what we're here to do today, is really focus in on, yes, everything that you've all mentioned is what creates hybrid learning. It's what makes up hybrid learning. But when we start looking at hybrid as a kind of a new blend, if you will, that's when we really can start focusing on what's really important, which is hybrid equaling the people in the environment. So I jump.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Joy uses the word hodgepodge. Love that. But also, I'm going to scroll up. I think it was Pam that said they don't differentiate between, they say they differentiate blended and hybrid. Well, we don't, and we do, actually. We do differentiate. I don't remember what Pam said. was way up there. But we do make a differentiation between those two words, and Karen will talk about that in just a few minutes. Because what we like to say, Karen, is hybrid is the new blended, right?
Exactly. And that difference will come to play in just a second. And probably, Pam, when you differentiate between blended and hybrid, this might help to pull them together. Because really, if we think about hybrid being the new blended learning, let's just unpack that for a minute. Hybrid is the new blended learning, meaning blended is really all about the content, right? Blended learning is about e-learning and lecture and breakout groups and infographics, right? The before, the during, and the after those live lessons. And it really is focused on content. But hybrid, we really think about what you all just mentioned, the mix, the combination. Hybrid is about the people. It's not just about the content. It's not just about the technology. It's bringing all of those pieces together and focusing on the human element, right? The human element is in teaching. The engagement, as John mentioned earlier, piques our interest. We as humans need to be connected. And that's what the hybrid environment, when we look at it as its own entity, really does. It allows us to focus on the people. And here at Insync, we have something called the people-to-people approach that we focus on, where it's really focused on the learner, identifying the learner intent, letting that intent drive the instruction, letting the instruction lead to that application, letting that application ensure practice, and then letting that practice determine that mastery. And when we think about hybrid as the new blended learning, it allows for all learners to work and learn from where they are and where they're ready to learn from. So Jennifer's going to walk us through how we take hybrid and the blend and the people and talk through the places that people do work from and how we create this unique environment, if you will.
So we've heard of micro-learning environments with little bite-sized pieces of content that we can consume in 10 minutes or less. So we're kind of using a play on that word and calling these macro learning environments. So what are the big environments in which people are learning? These are places. I want you to really think about these as places. We've got face-to-face. People learn face-to-face. That's one environment. That people learn virtually, a one-on-one with a computer. Most of you are probably learning virtually today. So in other words, a 1-to-1 ratio, one person, one computer logging in. And then we have hybrid. And a hybrid, and Karen will go into this in a lot of detail, it can be a lot of different things. It's where the people are and they move. If you've got a multiple day program, they might be learning in a different environment tomorrow. And think about when we're designing programs. If we're designing for the face-to-face environment only, it's easy. Well, it's not easy. It's an art to design for the face-to-face program, but our learners are having an equivalent experience. They're all in the same place, and we can design for that. When we're designing for a virtual environment only, also, same type of thing applies. There's certain types of design techniques we need to apply, but we're one-on-one relationship. I know how everyone is interacting and how I want them to interact, and so I can lead them. When it gets to hybrid, different people are interacting different ways, and that gets very complicated. Multiple people are in one spot looking at a projection screen. It does get very complicated. All of these places are macro environments, and hybrid is where it gets complicated. Today, we need to design and teach for all of these places. So we've got these three environments. So let's talk a little bit about the virtual configurations. We've got individual learners logged on to individual learners that are logged into different sessions. We've got groups of co-located learners. We've got individuals accessing maybe even via a mobile device. And I want to talk about mobile devices. Think of mobile as a place rather than a technology. Think about the fact that I can run videos on a mobile device. I can run virtual classrooms on a mobile device. I can access live content, on-demand content, my LMS on a mobile device. So when we say mobile learning, we're not necessarily talking about a type of technology. We're talking about a place. People are learning on the go, and that's critically important to remember and to make that distinction. So this is the where people learn. Let's talk about how they're learning. They are learning and being engaged in multiple ways. We call this our Inquire Engagement Framework. It's a way to engage learners in 3 different ways.
It's our philosophy that in order for true learning to really take place, learners must really be engaged in these 3 different dimensions: the emotional connection, the environmental connection, and the intellectual connection. And I like to think of it as sort of thinking through your mind, your body, your spirit in the virtual classroom. And in order for us to really reach a sense of psychological safety, the feeling of inclusivity, right, of a multicultural environment, the ability to see relevance, right, on how to apply specific content at hand, and not succumb to the tired Zoom fatigue that we all know is out there, right? We must be able to connect with how people learn. And the first way that I feel like people learn it is through their emotion, right? Their heartstrings. So if we can pull at the heartstrings of learners, that we can really connect the why behind the content, why they need to learn it, why they might need to have this information later on, and we can pull at the heartstrings to allow them to connect that body, that heart, then we can stimulate, right? The intellectual, the ability to stimulate action, to put into practice. And so that intellectual engagement, when the learner thinks about, how the information is being presented, like, ooh, you've intrigued me. Now I need to understand a little bit more. And we can do that all through the environment. And if you think about the environmental engagement, it's really about the tools, right? The technical aspects, whether that's within Zoom, outside of Zoom, in a different platform, utilizing a third-party tool, whatever it might be. We need to make sure that we're engaging with the learner on all 3 of these dimensions in order for learners to really be part of that new blended learning called hybrid. So, Jennifer, let's go ahead and take a look at the blend and how we lay out a content learning journey. This outlines, all of the pieces and parts from a content perspective. So if we think about that blended learning that Pam, you mentioned earlier, it's really focusing in on the ability to put all of the pieces, the collateral, if you will, into place, right? So we have some reading, we have some updating maybe on a discussion board, we've got some videos to review, maybe we've got some collaboration, those introductions, the meet and greets, if you will, and we really then are able to connect the dots. And when I mentioned that, blended is all about the content, you can't have content, well, you can, because it's called e-learning, right? But you can't have a blend without the people. So you'll notice that there are pieces of collateral throughout, things like infographics, articles, e-learnings, if you will, but there's also that meet, that view, that introduce, that connection, that collaboration. So from the content assets to the live and online experiences, through collaboration, ultimately landing, right, on the application and practicum of knowledge transfer. So this is the blend. And if you think about the blend's been here a long, long time. Blended learning's been around forever. And if we break it down and we start thinking about hybrid being about the people, now let's focus, Jennifer, on hybrid being about the people. And so Jennifer mentioned moments ago about this Bluebird technology and one of my clients. So we actually did create a scenario that we can share with other people about this hybrid experience. We call them Bluebird technology. It is a representation of my client that has been running for at least 5 years now. So that's prior to the pandemic. So they were hybrid before the pandemic. So hybrid's been around for a very long time. In fact, hybrid's been around for so long. If I think back, and Jennifer's going to nod her head at this, that 23 years ago, we were in a hybrid world. We were. Remember sitting around in a conference room with a conference speakerphone in the middle of the conference room and you've got a couple of people coming in from other places. That was a hybrid environment. We didn't know it at the time, but it really was. But let's take hybrid to a whole new level and talk about this hybrid environment. So you're going to take me, Karen. I started as a Bluebird Technology as a face-to-face trainer. Okay. At that time, Bluebird's employees were all local. They were all here in my hometown, and I actually taught them in-house at the company's home office in Elk Mound, Wisconsin. And this approach served the company well for many, many, many years. But in the last decade or so, Bluebird Technologies developed a national presence. And within the past year or so, we expanded to places like South America, Europe, Asia. And Sue and Richard, just to take those two individuals, they work from their business offices in Europe. Now, Gail and Bo are also in Europe, but they work in Bluebird's warehouses. And those are really important pieces to understand. Business offices in Europe and warehouses also in Europe. Now, they switch back and forth between their PC, their tablet, depending upon what they're doing every day, right? So they might be mobile, they might be in the warehouse and they need their tablet, so they need to be mobile. And then they also might be in their office, so they have their PC. Now, it didn't take long for us to realize that bringing all of our employees together in Wisconsin for face-to-face training was no longer a viable option, especially when KW came to us from, again, across the globe, right? So we decided to implement virtual training division to service these remote learners who couldn't make it to the company headquarters. And so we hired Troy. And Troy came in to assist me with this production. Now look at all those lines going back and forth, right? So it's Troy and myself, and we started delivering training from our headquarters in Wisconsin and connected with learners from all different areas of the world using the virtual classroom platform, such as WebEx, Adobe Connect, you name it, we did it. And in the meantime, I focused and continued to deliver face-to-face training for our local workforce. So I still had my local workforce, and then Troy and I also worked across the globe with our remote workforce. So this is how we landed at our hybrid workforce. Now, this approach seemed to make sense for a while, but it really didn't take us very long to realize that there were some discrepancies to this two-tiered approach to training, the learning experiences of these two groups. And we really wanted to start focusing on how to bring them together, right, in this unique environment. So there were some considerations, right, Jennifer, that we had to go through in order to come up with a fully functioning hybrid solution.
There were a lot of considerations. I'm going to talk through these at kind of a high level. What I'd like you to do is just think about them, write them down in your in chat, what really is standing out for you. But the first thing that organizations really need to do is they really need to redefine virtual learning. It hasn't been as valued as more traditional approaches. It's the thing we did when we couldn't do everything else. If it was really important, we'd bring you all together. Now virtual learning is permanent in this hybrid environment. And so organizations need to embrace that, really. And then we need to understand what our own hybrid audience really looks like. Karen just brought us through that technology company and what their hybrid audience really looked like. But how do we interact with them? What are they going to do day to day? How does that impact our design? Do they all have the same technologies? I've got a client in Africa, that has some folks in Africa, but some folks in Europe. And the people in Africa just don't have the bandwidth to run video or to run on-demand video. And so they were having different experiences because they were always saying, you can watch it later. You can watch the recording. We have to design for that hybrid audience. To do that, we really need a strong and an agile delivery team that understands what all this is about, because it's not just where people are, but it's about a multicultural audience. How do we interact with people that English is not their first language? With maybe we've got 6 different first languages in the audience. That takes a really strong facilitator and producer team to back each other up. And we need to ensure equivalent learning experiences. No matter how you choose to participate, we need to make sure that you're having an equivalent experience. Now, I got to say, Karen, this is different than what we used to say. When people said, well, can I just watch the recording? Or can I log in on my mobile device? Or can I just do listen only? We used to say no. We used to say no. Like, why would you do that? Because you're not getting the same experience. That's because we were designing for the virtual environment only, not for the hybrid environment. We need to design to have equivalent learning experiences across all of our learners, even if we don't know where they are. So if you are thinking that you're going to be teaching a one-on-one virtual experience, meaning one person, one computer, nobody face-to-face, and then all of a sudden you've got 3 groups of 5, that changes the designs of breakouts and interactions. And what we tend to do is we fall back and we start to lecture because we don't know how to engage everybody, but we know everybody can listen. We're starting to see in our designs that we have multiple ways of implementing each activity depending on who they are. And participant materials are starting to represent, if you're in a group, do it this way. If you're on a one-on-one experience, do it this way. It gets complicated, but if we want this to work, it needs to be inclusive and equivalent. And that gets us to the pulling on the heartstrings, Karen, right? An inclusive environment that encourages a sense of belonging. We've got diverse backgrounds. In the last couple of years, it wasn't just the pandemic, right? Different types of social revolutions came through about women, about people of color, about people with disabilities, and then we've got multicultural audiences. All of those make an impact. And how do we make our programs emotionally safe, psychologically safe, so everybody feels included and because learning is hard and learning is sloppy, and it doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be effective. So how can we foster that inclusive environment? And we also need to establish the value of hybrid learning, not just redefine it, but make sure people understand it's valuable. With this virtual first approach that we've been talking about, that I opened the session with, we have to create learning that is of comparable quality or maybe even higher quality than we expect in our face-to-face environments. And I'm here to tell you, if we design it well, we can create wonderful experiences, impactful experiences. And I'm here to tell you, you can create better experiences than face-to-face, but you need to do it in such a way that is inclusive. Karen, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think about Bluebird and how this client really thought about being inclusive. This client really thought about hybrid learning before hybrid learning was cool. This client wanted to include people, but I want you to think about this. When they came together to create the hybrid environment, think about what they did. They took me in the face-to-face world, right? And when we expanded, we took me and we expanded to the virtual world, all while I was still teaching face-to-face here. So what actually happened in this environment is it created 2 completely different environments, and it didn't join them together as one, right? Until they started to see that the virtual environments of the remote employees weren't as connected with the face-to-face employees, and they started to really see a disconnect. And so they had to start considering certain things. And when I brought it to their attention to allow the face-to-face people, the participants in the face-to-face environment, to open up a laptop and go into a Zoom environment so that we could bring the virtual learners and the face-to-face learners together, I was met with a brick wall. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want my face-to-face learners not focused on me as a trainer? Why would I want my face-to-face learners not feeling like I was only focused on them? And I said, why do we want our virtual learners to feel less than our face-to-face learners? And that's when the aha moment happened, that it is not a mix or a combination, but it's truly its own entity. And the only way that we can really be successful in a hybrid learning environment is to treat it as its own entity. So I just want to kind of go back to, the Bluebird, how they handled these challenges, because we actually walked through. I was their coach and I walked them through the 7 considerations. And, Jennifer, I'd like to walk through how we did that and how Bluebird responded to each of those considerations as they walked through and thought through how to make this hybrid learning environment not just good, but great. So the first piece, and I think it's really important, and what Jennifer talked about as far as redefining virtual learning, it's really all about thinking through that environment as its own and focusing in on real learning equaling real success. And so Bluebird embraced the fact that virtual learning is real learning. When they started to really look at the individual environment of remote work and face-to-face work, and when they found that they could bring them together, and KW in China and Troy in Texas could really connect and start creating this relationship, they embraced the fact that that was actually enhancing the overall learning experience. And they made a commitment to embed that virtual learning into their strategy versus just looking at it as an add-on. And that was, I think, the pivotal moment in the success of this program, is that it really, made them start working as a global team instead of a team in the US and then all of our other team members. That redefinition of virtual learning allowed for Bluebird to really take it from just learning to real learning and actually getting to those successful results. So if we take a look at, understanding what a hybrid audience looks like, and why Jennifer started today with what is hybrid, is there's so many different definitions of what is hybrid, right? But hybrid is truly a unique environment. And again, Bluebird made the same mistake, looking at them as 2 separate entities and thinking, about how do I bring them together, but not really together, just sort of side by side. Once they started looking at this unique environment, then they could start delivering a design for this specific environment so that they could be successful. And it wasn't until they really looked at it as a unique environment that they broke through and got results from their learners. I mean, the learners are what kind of drove this, because they were bored, they were sad, they were, not feeling like they were connecting, KW and say Troy in Texas. They weren't connecting and they weren't building those relationships. And so it came from the learners that helped kind of push through that unique environment. Jennifer?
Karen, can you share that story about how they were trying to make the people in the face-to-face classroom feel like they were in a face-to-face classroom? I mean, only in other, they weren't trying to merge the environments, and that was a struggle.
Yeah, that's that story that I mentioned just a moment ago about, being in that face-to-face environment and me at the front of the room. And, I suggested to them that they allow those face-to-face trainers or face-to-face learners to open up those laptops. And I was met with such resistance because they really wanted the learners to focus on the trainer, right? The SME, the learning that's supposed to happen in person. But they weren't thinking about, their virtual learners. They weren't thinking about how do we connect all of those pieces. But once they looked at it as a unique environment, then they started to think about, we could have, again, Troy in Texas work with KW in China in their breakout groups to start really thinking about how they could work together. Because let's face it, Bluebird Technologies is one company. And although KW works in China and Troy works in Texas, they're still working at the same company. And actually, those two work in the same department. And so making sure that we could train them in that unique environment was vital. So it was a big aha moment. And then it came down to the delivery team. All of their trainers had been training face-to-face forever. So they were like, they should be able to do this. We'll just take them from the face-to-face environment and put them in the virtual environment. And have them connect with everybody. And I'm here to tell you that did not happen. The face-to-face environment teachers focused only on the face-to-face environment individuals, and the ones that had virtual experience only really focused on the virtual experience. So we needed to bring the delivery team together to certify their trainers, because that then builds trust, not just with the learners, but with themselves, right? So Bluebird took this new environment seriously, felt it necessary to certify these trainers as hybrid virtual facilitators. Even those people that had been in face-to-face training for over 20 years. Because yes, those face-to-face trainers have the principles of adult learning. They understand how to connect with people, but what they forget or they don't know is how to connect all of the pieces in the hybrid environment, not just focus on one that they're comfortable with. Because let's face it, we all are creatures of habit, and we will connect with those we feel comfortable connecting in. So if I'm a face-to-face trainer, I'm going to be all face-to-face. If I'm a virtual trainer, I'm all virtual. We need to certify individuals to be both within this unique environment. So they embraced that, and they decided to spend the money to certify those trainers. And then from there, it was about the design, right? We can be great trainers. We can have individuals that really understand how to connect emotionally, intellectually through the environment. But if the design doesn't have a hybrid intentional lens, we were still going to fail. So at Bluebird, they hired a virtual instructional design coach through Insync training to help the designers embrace those nuances of the blend, right? The hybrid virtual learning activities necessary to connect all the learners. So we're not leaving anybody behind. We're really including all of those individuals through these well-designed, intentional hybrid activities. So we train these designers to focus on the tools, the techniques that bring all individuals together. And one of them is simple, right? It's a breakout group, but a breakout group amongst all the individuals, not just a breakout group in the face-to-face environment and then a breakout group in the virtual environment, but blending all of them into this new hybrid environment. So again, training that instructional team, helping them walk that path, partnering with them to make sure that we were designing activities that were inclusive for all, because that's how we would get to ensuring those equivalent learning experience can happen. We aligned the agenda. We aligned all of the pieces to make sure that that intentional design would align and create learning experiences for all. Because ultimately, right, we need to be able to include everybody. We want that sense of belonging. And the last piece is really how they established the value. And I want you guys to hang on the word value, because the value of hybrid virtual training doesn't lie in what technology you use. And that's what Bluebird figured out. It's not the coolest LMS. It's not the coolest platform. It's not the shiniest third-party tool. The value of hybrid virtual learning is the ability to connect all the pieces, the blend, the infographics, the articles, the e-learning, the live and online sessions, all the pieces, right, through the platform with the people. Think about that inquiry engagement framework that we talked about a little bit earlier. If we are emotionally engaging our learners through all that collateral I just mentioned, and we're emotionally engaging them through that content, through the environmental techniques and tools that we have available to us in today's world, we are ultimately able to intellectually stimulate our audience to get to that core result, the true value of learner transfer, right? And that's how Bluebird was able to address these challenges. At the end of their program, they could sit back and feel good about their global experience and being able to share all of this wonderful knowledge, but not just share it, but actually see it in action, see the collaboration happening, watch KW and Troy, interacting on the discussion board, working together in their small groups. So taking that blend and almost putting it on, high speed and getting individuals really the results that they deserve and they want. So make it a core component of what you do to all people, when they need it, where they need it, and how they need it delivered, because it's going to get you a faster result than if you look at those two entities separately.
So, Karen, two things while you were talking came to mind. Establishing the value of hybrid virtual learning with the emotional connection, emotional engagement. But to get to that emotional engagement, we have to create environmental engagement first. They need to know how they're learning, where they're learning, and what their role is. Am I just as important as a virtual learner as somebody who's face-to-face with the facilitator, for example? So do I know how to use all of the technologies? Video is a big part of environmental engagement. Learners, and there's real research about this, learners don't like to be on video all the time. It's uncomfortable, it's distracting, and it keeps them from learning. So we need to learn how to use that well. So environmental engagement really drives the emotional engagement. And without both, we can't intellectually engage. Karen, how do you feel about those comments?
You're exactly right. I mean, and the focus is on the environment as a vehicle, right? You step in a vehicle, whether it's a Mercedes or a Ford Escape, the vehicle is the vehicle. It's going to get you from point A to point B. And that's how we have to look at our environment, right? We have to understand where all the pieces and parts of that vehicle are. I need to understand how to put it in drive to move forward. It's a vehicle. But that vehicle, it doesn't matter what you're driving. It doesn't matter what vehicle you're in. It doesn't matter which environment you're in. If you're designing and delivering for that unique environment, then all your learners will be successful within that environment. And I think that that's the biggest piece to take away from today, is that hybrid virtual classrooms, hybrid workforce, the environment is unique to them, no matter where they are, no matter what they're doing. It's a unique environment where Jennifer in New Hampshire and me being in Wisconsin need to feel connected to each other in this environment.
Thank you. And my last quick point on this, when we were talking about the strong agile delivery team, that concept, I remember a discussion with them about how we needed to evolve their technical hosts into more like instructional partners. So there was a hosting component, certainly make sure the video works, make sure the tech works, but there was also an instructional component where they became what we call producers, where they're helping run the learning, not just learning the technology.
Mm-hmm. It's really that advocacy for learners, right? So what we've seen in the past is individuals in that hosting role, typically we're focusing on technology only, right? And what we're doing with Bluebird is kind of transforming them into instructional producers that allow the learner to have a safe place to fall, right? A place where they could connect with a person behind the scenes and they knew no question was stupid, that they could get the help that they need so that they could remain connected within that environment. And so designing for that instructional producer is something that needs to be intentional as well, because we can say, make sure you know how to push the button for the for whatever platform you're in to get them into breakouts. But it's more than that. It's making sure that when they get to breakouts, that they understand how to utilize the breakout, that they understand how to share their slides or share their screen or connect with the others. So having an instructional producer go into those rooms with them is sort of like following them along in the face-to-face environment, like, just to kind of look, just to kind of see, just to kind of guide. And that's a big piece that was missing in the Bluebird Technology Company until we walked through that intentional design.
Well, you talked a lot about organizational readiness here. How did Bluebird get ready? But they're not the only part. It's not just at the organizational level that we need to be ready, but we need to help the individuals that are actually learning.
Right. And I think that this is key. I mean, this takes me back to my days of academia, right? It's all about the end user. It's all about, I mean, why do we do training, right? We don't just organizationally think about training as a need. We think about what is the outcome that we're looking for. And everybody's looking for an outcome within that training of a transfer of those knowledge back on the job, right? So we want these skills to follow them. So we can't leave the learners behind. And there's an article coming out next month in the HR.com publication. Jennifer could pop that in the chat. That is 7 ways to ensure that no learners are left behind in your hybrid learning model. But I'm going to walk through these 7 components. It's pretty simple, but number 1 is make sure that everybody's logged in, so that individual that met me with resistance about the face-to-face trainers or learners being on Zoom while being in person with me, they have to be. If you're going to create this hybrid environment and this inclusivity, then every learner has to be in on a personal device, right? No matter how they're participating. If they're participating by phone, if they're participating by tablet, if they're participating by their PC, they have to log in on those devices. And another thing that's really important about that login aspect is making sure that the learner is learning from where they're going to do the work. So remember, I talked about Sue and Richard. Sometimes they were in their warehouse and sometimes they were at their desk at their PC. If the majority of their work is going to be done in the warehouse, they should be logging on to training on their tablet. That's where they're going to do their work, right? That's where they're learning from, where they're applying that learning. So they need to log in from that type of a device. And then, just like Jennifer mentioned, we have to reimagine our training team. We have to make sure that if we do have technical hosts, what else can we allow those technical hosts to do? Let them be advocates for the learners. Teach them how to really hold the hand of the 50 plus learners that are going to be in your session. Help to define and redefine what that looks like. Give them more to do than pushing buttons in the technology. And that brings us to incorporating those learning technologies, really making sure that we are utilizing all components of the instructional team. Just like you saw today, if something interrupts the flow of the program, the other person needs to be able to take it over. Technology happens. Technology hiccups happen. And we have to be able to punt. And so having those 2 individuals is vital. It's vital to the success of any hybrid learning environment. If it's only one person in a virtual session, in a hybrid session, and that person goes dark because of whatever reason, the whole session's lost. But if you've got those multiple individuals and we can incorporate that learning and both individuals can go back and forth to kind of step in whenever needed, then you can keep those disasters from being disastrous. And the other piece is teacher facilitators. I'm going to tell you, I was a face-to-face trainer for years and years and years, and I really thought that face-to-face training was the only way to go until I didn't. I mean, really, I mentioned earlier that I jumped in with both feet and was like, I'll jump on the train. I'll see how long this lasts. But it really does make an impact if the facilitators can be taught to maximize that emotional engagement and make sure everybody feels safe in the environment in which they're learning. And I don't just mean that they feel included or that they know how to raise their hand, but that they really feel a part of that environment. Then you're going to leave nobody behind. Well, it just comes to, adapting those activities. Don't just get stuck in what does Zoom have to offer? What does WebEx have to offer? What does MS Teams have to offer, not have to offer? How can we go beyond the screen? Right? How can we adapt activities to accommodate to this actual audience? How do we bring them together? Key word to learning is collaboration, right? We need to make sure that learners can collaborate. And that is the way that we are going to have a blended learning experience with our hybrid audience. It is critical. Blended learning is critical. The content is critical. I think Esther said content is king. We hear that all the time, and content is king. But the king can only be there with how its gestures are actually working with it, right? So we have to make sure that the
My suggestion?
or maybe I am. The people are the focus, right, of any hybrid environment. The people are the focus, and the content, yes, drives it. But we have to make sure that we're focused on the people. So don't leave anybody left behind.
Well, Karen, before I turn you over to our last really piece of content, I want to remind people we might not be able to answer your questions in session, but if you send them in chat, we will create a blog entry and we'll make sure everybody gets the answers. So, Karen, really, what's your... There's a question that came in, Karen, I think you can answer real quick, and then you can talk about the next step in your strategy.
Oh, absolutely. We do. Yes. Flipped classroom, reverse classroom training.
You have to read it out loud. It only came to us.
Oh. Do you use reverse classroom training approach as advocated by Khan Academy? Yes. So whether it's called reverse classroom training or the flipped classroom approach, that is exactly what we model within Insync training, what we teach other people. It's again focused on the people and focused on flipping that classroom so that we have that application. We've got individuals practicing. There's always going to be pieces and parts that we need to lecture or, share content on. But our motto is, we have to be having learners do something every 3 to 5 minutes. And within that 3 to 5 minutes, individuals need to be able to apply learning that they're using. So with that being said, what's your first step in your strategy? We would love to give you a gift of a virtual hybrid learning insight assessment. It is free. You'll be seeing that in your...
I'm sharing. Can you paste it in?
Yeah, no problem. So you'll see it in just a second in your chat window. But what this really is that it's an assessment for you from an organizational level to really walk yourself through 10 questions, fairly simple, about how you're doing in terms of hybrid virtual learning strategy. Now, it's not meant to say we're not doing a good job. It will just give you a score, a range to let you know you're doing a great job. And these are some considerations you could go from great to exceptional. It might say that you're doing a good job, and that these are some considerations you might think about from going from good to great. And for some of you, it might be like, okay, we've missed the boat. Here are some considerations to just help you get going. Not everybody is where we are in the hybrid learning strategy. So I do want to invite everybody to take this quiz. You don't necessarily have to do it today. You can bookmark it and do it later. But in today's rapidly evolving business landscape, organizations really do need to stay ahead of the curve to remain competitive. And integrating a hybrid virtual learning into your strategic plan ensures that your workforce is equipped with the skills and knowledge that they need. If there's one thing that the pandemic did in a positive way, is it allowed all of us to look at time and ourselves. And the learners of today are demanding this hybrid learning environment. And so your organization really should get on board if they haven't already. So again, start your organizational action plan, get yourself thinking about, your organization, your strategy. And I would encourage you, and I'll tell you at the end, but I'd encourage you to connect with one of us at Insync, most likely me, to go ahead and just talk through your action and to get, our insight as to what other things you might consider to take your programs from good to great.
And thanks. We've got one question that came in. I don't know that we have time to answer that, but we'll follow up with you, JW. Thank you all for being here. For the last 23 years, we've been a virtual organization, women-owned and women-managed, and we've only supported virtual hybrid events. We really think that you can be very, very successful. We don't need to say, oh God, we're in Zoom again, but we could say, yay, we get to learn today. So we'd love for you to stay in touch. We'll be in touch with you. And thank you for your time and attention. And Hester, thanks for helping us technology today.